I'm Bhavidhir V. Bhardwaj. Welcome to episode 16 of Genesis of Tomorrow. The following is a conversation about medical electronics, in vivo navigation, bionics, surgical robots, neurotechnology, and human enhancement, and more with Dr. Saransh Sharma, a MIT researcher with his master's and PhD from Caltech and bachelors from IIT Kharagpur, currently working in the field of integrated circuits and system design for biomedical healthcare applications for better health monitoring and treatment to enhance the overall quality of life. Also, 86.1% of you watching this have not subscribed yet. If you get even the slightest bit of value from our show, please support us by clicking that subscribe button so that we can keep improving the quality of the episodes and keep on bringing such wonderful guests over for you. And now, without any further ado, let's get right into it. Enjoy and thank you. Okay, it started. We are rolling now. Before anything else, I think it would be very beneficial for the viewers to get to know about sort of the history and the evolution of medical electronics. So, Dr.
Mhm.
Saransh, what has been this evolution and journey that medical electronics has witnessed?
That's a terrific question. Medical electronics, as we know of it today, uh, didn't used to be like this at all. Even if you look at like a few decades ago, the kind of devices that we use today were completely unheard of. The tools were very elementary, the devices were very elementary, the machines. For example, even X-ray, X-ray scanners, they came into existence only like 100 years ago, like 1910 or that time frame. Before that, we didn't even know what was going inside the body. And now X-ray scanners are like all over the place, and you use them kind of unanimously for finding things inside the body. And another simple example is MRI. So MRI came into existence like late 1970s in that time frame, and with that you can look into the brain. And before that, you had absolutely no idea what was going inside. So, the last century has seen tremendous, tremendous evolution of medical devices, even more now, like in the last decade, with the CMOS technology, with the smart chips and the miniaturization of devices, things have gone to another level, now, because not only do we have these big equipment outside the body, but we can do a lot of things inside the body as well. For example, smart pills or smart catheters or smart pacemakers, implants for the brain. So things like these were not really possible like a few decades ago when we did not have a very mature silicon technology. But with miniaturization and low power, now we have devices that can go almost anywhere inside the body. So the landscape is just like remarkable, things that are possible today. It just blows my mind as a medical device researcher myself. It's just like wonderful, and I'm really blessed to be working in this area because I see that the scope is immense. It'll keep growing because people keep falling sick, and you have to treat them. So medical devices is something that will never be obsolete.
Where do you think this industry will be at what junction would it be in the next 10 years or 15 years? What all plausible advancements do you see coming?
Uh, Several, for one, I see that devices will be much smarter. Right now, we do have smart devices, but I do envision that there'll be a lot of things that will happen on the device itself. For example, right now, we are able to do a lot of signal recording and some processing, not a lot because of the power constraints, but in future, like 5, 10 years, I do believe that more processing will be part of the device itself. So you can do local decision making and you can do local drug delivery by packaging drugs in the device itself. So all of those things, like a autonomous loop, if I can say, the device is fully autonomous. You don't really need a clinician. So I do think that in the coming 5, 10 years, we will make significant advances towards that direction. How much to fruition that might come, that is still, kind of dependent on a lot of factors. But I do feel that there'll be a lot of advancements in that direction. And, given the kinds of advancements we are doing in AI, I also feel that a lot of things that we currently rely on medical technicians and people with a lot of medical background to look at things and tell the patient what's going on with them. I think all of that will also be relayed to technologies like AI, that it can kind of figure out patterns or disease conditions and tell the patient at home. So you don't need to visit the clinic. So that's one thing I do feel will definitely happen, that the clinical visits will reduce for things that are not really pressing. So you can do a lot of at-home diagnosis and at-home treatments, and only for pressing things or problematic things you have to visit the clinic. That's the direction I see medical devices going in.
You briefly touched upon the matter of miniaturization and the increase in the efficacy of the energy sources of these medical electronics. Another aspect of this is how these advancements in these areas have led to a better way for us for in vivo navigations. Um, you also talked about this idea or this conceptualization of carrying drugs, or drug carrying nanobots of sorts. Expand upon that a little, please.
For sure. Thank you for asking. So in vivo navigation, I'll take this in bits. So in vivo navigation is a very important concept that has to be taken care of for any kind of device. Simply being, if you administer something at a wrong place inside the body, it can be catastrophic. So you really have to be sure where you are inside the body before you do any kind of sensing or procedure or treatment or drug delivery. So navigation is the first thing that has to be done. And a lot of my prior research has been in the space of in vivo navigation. So how can you make devices and equipment that can help people, patients, clinicians, and the staff to navigate things very accurately inside the body. And we overcame a lot of the challenges in that space of navigation by designing systems that are safe, that are radiation free, that are very reliable and accurate, and you can use them in non-clinical settings. So you don't have to be in a hospital for using them. So these are some of the limitations that current clinical systems face. So in my research, we overcame a lot of these problems, and our in vivo navigation system is kind of very robust and accurate and does not require any harmful X-ray radiation. So with that, we at least solved one problem. And now for the other problem of drug delivery, and that is what I'm trying to do as part of my current research, that in these devices that we are able to use for navigation, we can also package some small amount of drug that is physiologically relevant, and release the drug whenever there is a signal that triggers the mechanism of, let's say, a certain disease or a certain biomarker that we may be looking for. So that's something that we are doing right now. And in all of this space, I do want to mention that miniaturization has been one of the key factors, if not the most important factors, because you imagine if you want to navigate inside the body without the help of wires or catheters or endoscopes and things like that, and if you want to power that thing by itself, or like maybe by a very small battery, there has to be a lot of miniaturization, because there's a lot of electronics that is sitting on that device, a lot of mechanical components that are sitting on that device. So unless we have things miniaturized, there's just no possibility of making someone swallow that device, right? Like, we look at a big thing, the last thing we want to do is swallow that thing, right? So miniaturization is the key, and silicon technology has really enabled that dramatically. And with miniaturization, it's not that only the area reduces, you also save a lot in power, right? Because now you are only designing things that are of absolute necessity for that device. So you are cutting down a lot of the peripheral things that come with traditional devices that are not really useful in medical devices. So you can custom design your features, your circuits, and your functionality, and that way not only are you smaller but also extremely low power, and then that power one can get from either extremely tiny batteries or wireless power transfer mechanisms. Again, something that we have researched a lot upon, that how to send power wirelessly. And even more recently, there's a big trend in harvesting power from within the body. So from fluids inside the body or from the motion of the body, you can kind of harvest small amounts of power. And by storing that, you can accumulate enough power to perform relevant physiological functions.
To give a technical description, a more theoretical based kind of an explanation about this, what are you doing while you're building these devices in your labs? Because as compared to, as you very brilliantly mentioned, that seeing a general normal piece of electronic equipment, it's very tough to imagine a human being swallowing it and having it
Mm,
go inside your body. But with these nanoscale equipments, what how do you work on them, how do you curate them, and how do you make them
mm,
in general?
mhm. Fantastic question. Yeah, and that's exactly what I do. So I'm glad I get to talk about, some of the nitty-gritty of my research. I specifically use CMOS technology, and so what that does is it allows you to work with these extremely small components called transistors, and these transistors are nanometer scale. So the current state of the art is just a few nanometers. So the kind of transistors that are used in smartphone chips, those are a few nanometers. But for medical devices, we don't need that small. We can work with a few tens of nanometers. So we usually work with like 50, 60, or in that range of nanometers of transistors. And then by combining a lot of these transistors in a certain topology, we create functionalities, for example, signal sensing. So these transistors, when you give them input of a certain biological signal, they can amplify that signal, and you can then read that signal out on the chip. And after amplification, you can do post processing. For example, you can digitize the signal, or you can extract some feature from the signal. All of this is happening on a silicon which is like 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter. That is the kind of footprint of the entire device. And inside that device, there are transistors that are carrying out this functionality. And then the role of someone like me as an electrical engineer is to design this entire silicon chip in a software that we call Cadence Virtuoso, and that we use for creating different topologies with different size transistors and different components, and that helps us achieve this functionality. And once we have the design of this entire chip, we then outsource it to a company called TSMC in Taiwan, and they fabricate the silicon chip for us. TSMC is a big hub that does CMOS chip fabrications for a lot of institutions, not only universities, but even NVIDIA gets their CMOS chips fabricated from TSMC. So that is like the overall flow from the design of these chips all the way to fabrication and then testing.
What impact could these in vivo advancements have on treating conditions and diseases like maybe cancer? Because right now chemotherapy is a very enduring process for the patient, to say the least. How could
Mm,
it help or aid in that?
mm, mm, mm. Uh, Fantastic, and that's one of the areas that I feel very strongly about. The reason being, there's a lot that we can do as medical device experts in that domain, and even before the onset of cancer. So let me give you an example of how we can, kind of, curtail this timeline of cancer by a significant amount if we have these kinds of medical devices. So one of the directions that one can pursue, and a lot of people are pursuing that direction, is to have miniaturized devices that can be present inside your body as chronic implants. And these devices can look for certain biomarkers and patterns in physiological signals. For example, is the cytokine level at a certain site in the body increasing over time, or is it consistent over time? Or let's say if you're looking for a certain hormone, um, is that hormonal level changing over time? So, by monitoring these patterns and by looking for certain specific biomarkers for specific types of cancers, one can even detect early onset of cancer progression. So, that way, your treatment modalities, which I'll talk about shortly, so your treatment modalities can kick in very, very early on. And that way, the mortality rate that is associated with cancer can be significantly reduced. So that's step one, that how can you detect it very early on in the progression. Step two, which is the treatment of it. Instead of doing chemotherapy, which is a little all over the place, right? Because then you're ablating not only the diseased tissues, but also the healthy tissues. So instead of that, if you can have these miniaturized devices that have the drug packaged into them, then they can go to that cancerous location and they can deliver the drug locally, be it a very tiny dose of X-ray, be it a very tiny dose of a certain kind of biomolecule that has to nullify the effect of the cancerous molecule. So these kinds of things can be done with medical devices instead of having to use chemotherapy. So that's the treatment process. And finally, what I also feel is by using these miniaturized devices as tags, these tags can be placed at the location of where the cancer is inside the body. And then, based on that location, you can choose to pinpoint and bombard your X ray radiation at a very, very small location, which is exactly targeting the cancer cell. So instead of being a little all over the place and ablating a lot of healthy tissues, you can be very specific in, eliminating cancerous cells with the help of external chemotherapy. So as you can see, we can cover a lot of things with these devices, miniaturized devices, beginning from early detection to autonomous treatments inside the body, and all the way to precision treatment if it is done outside the body.
There are a few different things that I would want to explicitly talk to you about from this particular explanation of yours, starting with the matter of chronic bioimplants. When you talk about that, do you see or envision a future and reality where having these enhancements, biological enhancements, become a norm or a normalcy? And how would that impact the society in general towards advancements of healthcare overall, but also what implications or ethical considerations would it then invariably arise due to the matter of hackability,
Hmm,
is
hmm,
what
hmm,
I'm trying
hmm.
to sort of get to.
Right, right. No, I get the idea. And that's a very important question. So for the first part of your question, which is about the normalcy of chronic implants, I do see this becoming a very acceptable norm in the coming few years, in a decade or so, most definitely. The reason being, people really want to monitor their health round the clock. Like, if there's one thing that someone wants to monitor all the time, is their health, right? And there are many examples of that even today. For example, glucose monitors that people wear on their arms that is constantly monitoring glucose patterns in their bloodstream. So not only that, I envision that in addition to glucose, we will be monitoring for a lot of things. For example, a very simple thing like temperature. How is your in vivo temperature or your temperature inside your stomach changing? So people definitely want to measure that. So a lot of these devices in the future will be sitting inside the body like pretty much all the time. And then you'll be always connected with them through your smartphones or some other smart devices. So I do envision that the IoT that we think of, which is currently outside the body, that IoT will eventually come inside the body. So you have a lot of devices sitting all over the place and they're monitoring and looking for certain things, and you always have information about them on your phones. So that I think for sure is going to be something that is going to be acceptable by society. Overall, in terms of healthcare, how it benefits is that, as I was alluding to earlier in my explanation for cancer treatments, this is extremely important in helping us figure out patterns very early on, right? So you can think of, not just cancer, but even Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disorders. So there are a lot of reports that suggest that if these are detected early on, and if drugs are administered based on that, early detection of the onset of these diseases, we can save a lot of the time span of the person that is spent with these debilitating diseases. So I do think that a lot of these, sensors and medical devices that will be resident inside your body will dramatically help in uplifting the kinds of healthcare tools and technologies we use, and the overall baseline healthcare levels of our society will go up as a response to using these medical devices. So that I very strongly feel about. But then that also invites challenges, which you referred to in this question. That then what happens to the safety part or the hacking part? That is a real challenge, and we are cognizant of that, and we design our devices in a way that we also incorporate safety elements in our devices. For example, only the person who has those devices inside their body is the one who has access to the data, and if they choose, they can share that data with their clinician, just so that they can get an expert's opinion on that. So in all of this process, there's a lot of wireless data communication that is happening between the devices and the person, and again wireless data communication that is happening between the person and the clinician. So there's a lot of places where hackers can get into and try to figure out these sensitive and individual biological data patterns, and that those can be used as an adversary attacks towards the person, right? So we are working towards safety and privacy of these data collection ways, and how we transfer them, how we get the data back from these devices. So safety is an important concern. There are a lot of work that are being done in encryption and decryption of this kind of data pattern, and we are exploring specifically low power and efficient architectures that can be used for uh, encryption of the data right at the stage of collection, so that we have very, very secure data patterns. So that is something that is an ongoing work and will definitely be needed uh, as these medical devices mature over time. So yeah, I do feel that these things have to be taken care of. And I briefly want to mention that not just that, even the use of AI in medical devices can lead to a lot of kind of attack prone situations. So we have to be very careful in how we implement algorithms and AI technologies on our devices, just to make sure that we are keeping the privacy and safety of the person at the very core of it. That's not something that we can compromise with at heart.
There are again two branched approaches that I want to take uh, as our way forward, but they are also parallel in nature. First being the advancements and the future of neurotechnology and in general neural signal processing and whatever's up with the brain, and second being the matter of prosthetics and bionics and the AI integration in those things. So uh, start with any one of the two that you feel would be
Mm,
viable, but
mm,
yes.
mm, 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 mm. Yeah, let me get started with the neurotechnology bit. The reason that is because it's a little close to what I do, and it's
Mm,
something that I'm more interested in moving forward.
mm,
So this again speaks about the kind of revolution that CMOS and silicon technology has brought about. Because if you think of like a decade or so ago, or even like maybe a few decades ago, when silicon maybe was not as mature, you would not really think of putting something inside your brain, right? But now with devices as small as a millimeter or even sub-millimeter, and the
mm,
device is being wireless, and the device is being so low powered that you can send power to them through wireless transfer mechanisms, you can actually envision devices sitting inside your brain. And that is what enabled a lot of the neurotechnology, that the devices have shrunk dramatically. They have become extremely low power. Now you can connect with them wirelessly, and that way you can choose to put them in your brain at locations that were not possible before. Now, what that leads to is now you're able to record signals from neurons at single neuronal level. And that is, again, something that was not possible in the past. So this comes with a lot of advantages, right? Because if you are able to observe patterns from a bunch of neurons or a single neuron, you can study very closely what happens in conditions such as epileptic seizures, such as depression, such as mood disorders, such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's diseases. So all of these, and some of these are like life-threatening diseases, right? So if you are able to study all of these, or even some for that matter, to a point where you can figure out what is happening in the brain that is triggering or that is leading to these diseases or that is exacerbating these diseases. One can then design their treatment, techniques accordingly. So you are not kind of doing a systemic dosage of drugs that go all over the place and are treating for something that you have no idea about, but by studying these brain patterns and neuronal signals, you can be very specific in what is wrong and how to treat it more efficaciously. So that's something I feel about neurotechnology, and that actually very organically connects with the second component of the BCI that you mentioned. And neurotechnology is something that is essential to interfacing the brain with external components, be it a computer, be it a prosthetic tool that someone is using. So that's like at the core of this, right? And then for the other part that you mentioned, the bionics and artificial limbs and implants like that, I don't specifically work in that area, but I have friends and collaborators who do work in that area. And that's something very important for places where they have a lot of amputees. For example, places of civil war, or a lot of crisis situations where people do go to war and they lose a lot of their limbs. So their prosthetic equipment and prosthetic limbs are very important. And in that space also, there's a lot of role that electronics, that medical devices plays, because if you think about it, the way these prosthetics are connected to the body is not just through a pick and place kind of a thing, right? Because if that was that simple, then it wouldn't have taken us this long to get to a point that we are at today. So there's a lot of electrical signaling that happens between the part of the body that has been amputated and then the prosthetic limb that has been connected to that part. And by electrical signaling, I mean that the neuronal connections that were kind of chopped off at the place where the amputation happened, you kind of have to make those neuronal connections, those nerve connections, those muscle connections back with the prosthetic limb that one is looking at. And a lot of that requires not just electronics, but a lot of mechanical engineering, tissue engineering, and things of that nature, which I am by no means an expert of, but I have huge respect for people who do that. So I'll just leave you with that because I don't think I have more background in that area to shed more light.
No, I believe you were still able to give a fundamental idea for people about how this field in general looks like currently and what are the areas that can be improved upon. However, coming back to the first part of the question that I asked, and asking you to expand it more a little bit, how much do we currently actually know about the brain and its functioning? And could these neural implants, so to speak, much like the most advanced one, would Neuralink be the example of it? And if yes, how much has it contributed to in extracting crucial information for us to be bettering our understanding about how the brain works?
Mm-hmm. Uh, I would say that in terms of how much we currently know about the brain, very little. Very, very little. This is still more than what we knew, like maybe a decade or so ago, simply because we didn't have the tools. But the brain is a very, very complex machine. And the way things are connected in the brain, it is highly complicated. And our tools, I still feel in a way we are trying to get there, but our tools are still in a way kind of elementary, uh, in the sense that we still don't have like mass deployment of these brain computer implants that can go almost anywhere in the brain, can record almost anything, can send the data out. No, we're not there yet. We are trying to get in that direction, and a lot of effort is being made in that direction, but a lot needs to be done. Having said that, it is not all pessimistic. We have made significant advances in that direction. And by that, I mean like a lot of the groups that are working in brain computer implants, um, studying epileptic seizure patterns or studying mood disorders or depression. There is good amount of research that is trying to understand the brain signals that go wrong or kind of go unusual in these kinds of disease conditions, that what exactly is happening in what location of the brain that is leading to epilepsy. So there are some advancements that are being made in that direction, that where to record from, which can give us the best signal for epileptic seizure onset. And once we know that, then we can try to target just that area of the brain for doing some kind of mitigation strategy towards epilepsy. So those are some advancements that are being made. But I do feel that we need a lot of these tools and devices to kind of go like a little bit all over in the brain, to connect a lot of signals from different locations in the brain. Because if you think about it, it's not that one part of the brain functions independently of the other. There's a lot of crosstalk and cross linkage and things that are happening simultaneously, right? So you cannot really choose to observe from one location and discard the other. So that is why mass deployment is so important in an organ like brain, that we need to be recording simultaneously from so many different locations so we can study what is happening in tandem, right? Uh, Commercial companies like Neuralink and other companies like IMEC in Europe, that they're trying to build implants for the brain to get these signals out. They are making quite good advancements in that direction by having a state-of-the-art silicon technology in their devices and having extremely small form factors and wireless deployment of these devices. So yes, we are trying to get there, and these companies, I think, will be in collaboration with academia, of course, will be kind of leading the efforts in that direction. Because once there's a commercial interest in a technology, you kind of see the extreme importance of that thing, because otherwise there's no reason why someone like a billionaire would pick up an idea and would try to make a company out of that, right? So these commercial advancements, in my opinion, are very important because they kind of accelerate the progress that we make in that direction. But that bit aside, I do feel that just by the severity of these diseases, and given that we are observing promising things inside the brain because of these devices, there is just a lot of hyped interest, and rightfully hyped, to explore more in the brain.
I'm again compelled to ask you for a technical breakdown of how these brain chips work.
Yes. Some of the core components inside these brain chips are signal recording front ends. So what happens is you have very, very tiny electrodes that are coming out of these brain chips. So if you imagine the brain chip itself to be 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter, you have very tiny electrodes, which are like sub millimeters, coming out of this brain chip. And these electrodes are specifically looking for neurotransmitter signals that the neurons are releasing. Once they detect that, then the electrodes get that signal on the chip, and on the chip we have uh, the front end is most of the time composed of some sort of an amplifier, because the level of these signals are so tiny that you first need to amplify these signals. And not only do we do that, we also do denoising of the signals, because these brain signals have a lot of noise riding on top of them. So this amplification, denoising, all of this happens on the chip. Once we have something on the chip that we can kind of uh, look at and make something meaningful out of, then we most of the time end up doing digitization of that signal, in the sense that we don't want to deal with sensitive analog signal, but we want to make it into a robust digital signal. So that also happens on the chip. Once you have the digital signal, then you can choose to do some of the processing on the chip. And that is helpful because you don't want to send raw data, because that's a lot of data to be sent out. You don't want to send raw data outside to the external receiver for further processing. So some of the pre-processing or classification or selection of the key parameters of these brain signals using these digitized signals is happening on the chip. And then when we transfer it to external receivers, that is where we can do more power hungry and more sophisticated algorithms to figure out what exactly is happening with these brain signals.
Really, really interesting. Um, Before jumping on to something else, as a rule of thumb, what would you suggest people as the maybe the five things that you must know about your health, the five metrics that everybody should measure about their health?
Mm-mm. Um, Very good question. Let me think. What can those five metrics can be? I would say the first metric is like by constantly I mean like every once in a while, make sure how your BMI is, like how your body weight corresponds to the height and all of that, because BMI is something that one should definitely be keeping track of. Other thing I would say is temperature, that make sure that almost on a daily basis one measures their temperature, that how they're doing inside the body. And this is sometimes it gets confused with external body temperature. So when you're measuring something using the thermometer in the mouth, it only gives you local temperature, but having something that can measure the in vivo temperature is very important, because we don't really know what's happening inside. So that is something I would say is useful. um, Third thing I would say is vision. That always be aware of, how your vision is doing, because sometimes people don't really pay attention to that. And like even for myself, I feel that my vision is getting slightly worse because I cannot see very far off. But I'm like, it's okay, I can manage. But that is not how it should be. One should try to make sure that they visit the optometrist often to get their vision inspected. So that's important. Um, and I would also say that oral health is very important. So every once in a while, make sure that one visits a dentist to kind of get their oral health inspected, because a lot of the disease conditions kind of begin in the mouth, and if you're able to keep things in a way that every like month or so you're getting your oral health examined thoroughly, it can be a good measure of how things are progressing. Fifth, I would say every year or every like kind of 6 months, one should get a complete body exam done at a clinic. And I feel this is more important for um, slightly elderly population. For example, people who are in their late 40s and 50s and so forth, they should definitely get an annual health exam done, simply because a lot of the things that we kind of find out late, for example, breast cancer, we find out about breast cancer most of the time, if not all the time, at a stage where curing is extremely hard, right? And a lot of research has shown that if you get a mammography done uh, maybe 6 months sooner or a year sooner, you could have really done significantly better to save that person or to extend the lifespan of that person. So I feel that people, after 40s should try to prioritize getting an annual health exam done, which kind of inspects everything in their body. So those I think would be my five, kind of key things. And some of these are like daily things. Some of these are more of infrequent things, but nonetheless, they're all quite important.
No, that's right. The very reason I asked you this question in the first place is because umpteen times people take their health for granted and as something that is
Yeah.
in a constant state of efficacy. No, your body needs you to take care of it. And umpteen times the things that you said that you neglect in the short term, they stack up and then come back to bite you in the longer term.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But okay,
Absolutely.
going on a different track entirely altogether, I am also very intrigued as to how you got into the work that you're doing right now. What was that initial spark that made you
Mhm.
take this path?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and it's not like a short answer I have to that, but let's see if I can make it short.
No, no, give me the long story, right?
So I come from a family of doctors. Like everyone in my family is a doctor. My dad is a doctor. My sister, my cousins, they're all doctors. So growing up, I felt that I would also end up becoming one, like, curing people in a hospital, in a clinic and whatnot. But I realized biology wasn't something that I really enjoyed. It didn't really give me a kick. And to be honest, I feel I wasn't also very good at biology because back then I think a lot of it had to do with memorizing very complicated names, and I was like, this is not me. I cannot do this. Whereas, physics and math and things like these, they were more logic oriented, intuition oriented, and you didn't have to remember a lot. You just had to apply equations and kind of use your logic more. So that part was always very interesting to me. So my path shifted slightly more towards engineering from very early on. And since I was intrigued by physics and mathematics, I studied electronics and electrical engineering for my undergrad. And within that domain, I did a few internships at different universities, and that really exposed me to different kinds of research aspects within electrical engineering. So I found out about this very cool area of circuits and chip design, which is also called VLSI. And I was really blown away by the fact that how can you do so much with something so small, and it just gives you a lot of kind of freedom in packing so many diverse things, so many diverse functionalities on a very very small thing. And I was like, that's something I want to do. So I chose circuits and VLSI as my specialization in undergrad, and then I was in very interested to do a PhD. But before coming for a PhD, I didn't really know what exactly in circuits I wanted to do, like what subdomain within circuits I want, because within circuits you can choose to work on circuits for biomedical applications, which is what I chose to do, and circuits for wireless communication, circuits for RF applications. There's a lot of different variety in that. So when I came for PhD, when I was looking at different kinds of works people had done in my lab and people around, I was very intrigued by biomedical applications because this, somehow rang that bell in my mind that, oh, you come from a family of all doctors. There's everyone trying to help people. And what are you doing as an engineer? Shouldn't you also be thinking of helping people? And I'm like, yeah, that's correct. And when I read more about the work that was happening, it just really, really blew my mind because not only is it very exciting and interesting, but you can see the impact of it very quickly and very directly, right? Because any kind of medical device that you make, you can really see it working in at least in animals, like within a few months of making the device. Of course, getting it to a human level is another major step because you have to go through a lot of approval and whatnot. But you can really see your devices being transformative, and that visual impact, that direct impact, that really was kind of the ultimate thing for me, and I was sold for it, that no, I really want to work in medical devices. And one thing leads to another. Once you start working on something, you get so interested in that you want to go even deeper. So now I feel that I am somebody who really enjoys doing medical devices, from not only electrical engineering perspective, but from also from a biomedical engineering perspective, that I combine different things from biomedical engineering, as in like mechanical components of the device, the packaging part of the device, the testing part of the device in animals. So there's just a lot of things that has to happen to make a medical device successful, not just the electrical aspect of it. So I'm glad I've had this journey all the way from electrical now to a more comprehensive medical device engineer.
Would you say, with the advent of newer and novel technologies, the scope for interdisciplinary branches have significantly increased than pure branches? Is that
Yeah, I would definitely say that. The reason being, if you look at the so-called pure branches, there's a lot of fundamental research that has happened in those areas, right? And some of those areas are even to a point where they've almost reached saturation. So there's not a lot that one can do in those saturated areas. It becomes harder, right? And it's not very easy to find like maybe a new transistor or a new technology or something like that. So in that way, one can choose to focus on something which is more interdisciplinary, which combines a lot of these, basic science or basic engineering disciplines together. And I do feel that a lot of innovation lies in that combination, because these are the things that we did not do before. Because before we were too engrossed in making the core discipline advanced. So now that we have that core discipline advanced, we should try to focus on combining these core disciplines and making new things out of that. So I feel a lot of innovation and exciting work lies at those junctions where collaborations happen.
also talk to me about this area of trying to mimic synthetic organs. uh, how much so ever you're aware about it, but like what is the basic idea behind doing that, and how far are we towards accomplishing that?
Yeah. Fantastic question. And the reason this has gained traction is because it gives you the flexibility of experimenting with an organ in a lab setting, right? So a synthetic organ, without having to cut through an animal or without having to work with an animal, you can choose to do a lot of the things on the organ. You can try different drugs, you can try different stimulation mechanisms, you can try different, kind of triggering or measuring mechanic. You can try whatever you want on that synthetic organ. And all of this can be done in a lab that doesn't have to deal with all the heavy protocol work that needs to go in if you have to work with an animal. So the advantages are huge. And that is why there's a lot of work that is in this direction, that you can get synthetic organs. Um, in terms of how useful this is, uh, as I mentioned earlier, it gives you a lot of flexibility. But the thing that I wanted to mention was there are also artificial synthetic organs. For example, just the computational versions of that, or something that is entirely in algorithm or entirely in the software. And the reason this is important is because it gives you a very comprehensive model of an organ on a computer platform, and you can choose to tweak things or do things in real time. You don't even have to work with a synthetic organ in the lab, sitting on the bench and then trying to poke needles through it. You can do all of that poking and everything on a computer screen with these 3D visual artificial models of the organs. And this again has been made possible by observing the actual models in the animals or the humans over a long period of time and trying to understand them to a point where we can extract all the information from it to reconstruct that on a software. So I feel that both of these, the synthetic organs in a lab and synthetic organs on a computer, they have tremendous advantages because they help you do or accelerate the research quite dramatically.
What do you think is okay? Brain and heart organs like these are relatively tougher to build or convert into a synthetic form. However, there still is research and everything being
Yeah.
conducted on it, and they are trying to build a, the heart tissue from a spinach leaf. The last I read a report about something like that. But
Hmm.
my point is, what is the most viable, or with our current technology, which organ is the most we could manage to replicate
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
short term right now?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's like maybe like $1 million question, What's like the best organ that we can replicate? And as you alluded to, these organs are very, very complex, like brain and heart, they're extremely complex. We're even close to that we can get something even like closely resembling what these human organs do. I think in the short run, something that is more tangible is some of the less complex and smaller organs. For example, the model of the eye, so we can understand a lot of the functionality of the eye, look at a lot of the eye disorders, and see what is happening during certain, eye conditions. So that is something that can happen fairly quickly, and I know a lot of people are working in that direction too. Um, Another organ that I feel is kind of um, something that is not extremely difficult to mimic is, for example, our ears and our nostrils and all. So they can also have certain good physiological benefits when one is able to get a good, accurate model of it. I think ears more so because there are conditions that are associated with the ear, with the auditory canal and hearing disorders. So these are not extremely hard to replicate. But, heart and brain and even stomach or anything in the gut, it's very, very complicated. There's so many, nerves and muscles and crosstalk and yeah. So I think it'll be some time before we can get to that. Yeah.
I feel there has been an underlying theme in this conversation of ours, which we didn't have yet, which we haven't touched yet. That being the matter of bioinformatics and data science. What
Mm,
if what contribution is it making right now in all the research that you do, and what are the foreseeable implications that it could have in the future research and advancement?
mhm,
Because you did talk about
mhm,
how we are taking an algorithmic and approach towards simulating these organs to
mm,
get to know
mm,
more about
mm,
them, and data
mm,
plays a
mhm.
humongous role in that. So maybe
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
that a little.
Yeah, absolutely. So data is something that is extremely, extremely crucial in the world of biomedical engineering or medical devices, simply because a lot of the decisions that we need to make about designing these medical devices or selecting different aspects or features of these medical devices, they have to be data driven, right? Because without the data, you don't really know what you're designing for. And one of the problems that we face as a community is the lack of data in this domain, right? Because it's personal data, it's sensitive data. So we cannot really get a lot of it from hospitals because of privacy concerns. We only get it from individual patients. And for that to happen, we need to have our devices given to them, which again needs FDA clearance and whatnot. So data really remains to be a bottleneck in how we can collect it. And data is also, despite being a bottleneck, is one of the extremely important components in helping us design these. And one of the examples I will give you is for example, in understanding X-ray images, right? So right now you need a very clinically trained uh, person or a clinician to look at the X-ray to detect what is happening at certain location in that X-ray because or she has the expert background in that domain to read the X-ray thoroughly, right? But if you had enough data to train an algorithm or a machine to understand what certain features in the X-ray mean or what they represent, then a lot of the work that has to be done by this clinician can be reduced. And that doesn't go on to say that we are taking away their jobs. It's just that we are making their jobs lighter by reducing some of the mundane workload that they have to do, and then they can choose to work on something that's more intriguing and that requires more of a human attention, right? So that way data is very important in all of these aspects in terms of helping us decipher patterns, in terms of helping us train these equipment and machines that can help us decipher those patterns. So all of that are extremely data driven. The same goes on for bioinformatics as well, like in imaging and in signal acquisition. A lot of the things that we acquire, we need a good understanding of what that actually represents. Collecting mass scales of data and being able to use that is definitely something that our whole community wants to do, but faces challenges.
What do you think is the most significant or seminal aspect of R&D that aspiring researchers have must keep in mind?
Yeah. Uh, I would say that aspiring researchers, including myself and many others, we should always try to look at things holistically, right? It is not one person or one component or one discipline that drives the invention. Medical devices is not only electrical or only mechanical or only chemical. At the end of the day, it is the patient, it is the people that we want to serve, right? And you cannot serve them or help them by doing just one aspect of the work. Okay, I am an electrical engineer, I did my bit, now it's not my headache anymore. No. We have to work as a team. We have to make sure that the patient or the condition that we are working towards is at the center of it. And with that goal in mind, we should all work together in a very collaborative way to make these devices come to fruition sooner than later. Because I feel that a lot of friction gets created and a lot of problems happen when people with different backgrounds try to work together. So, remembering the ultimate goal, remembering the umbrella that underpins all of this, is the most important thing in my opinion. And of course, besides that, one should also spend a lot of time in honing their own craft, like whatever background one comes with. One should try to always stay up to date with research going on in that background and also have an open eye for things outside that domain, especially things that are kind of peripheral to that. For example, as an electrical engineer, I should not be kind of aloof from things happening in computer science or things happening in mechanical or engineering disciplines that are kind of closely related to what an electrical engineer is supposed to do. So having an open eye towards other disciplines, trying to know at least some fair bit of what's happening out there, and when working in a very ambitious area like medical devices, having an open mindset in working with each other and always keeping that end goal in mind. I think those are things that we as researchers should all remember. And regardless of like early researchers, even seasoned researchers in this domain should try to remember that what is the end goal? Who are we trying to serve? And do my intentions or do my work or do my techniques serve that end goal? That I feel is very important.
Along with having and knowing your own vision of why you started doing what you are doing right now, a very significant part of it is also doing the small things, the daily quotidians, and taking those small steps each and every day. What would you suggest as a routine of sorts, not on a daily basis, but maybe a practical routine on that one must follow every once in a while to keep on imbibing and inculcating and just advancing themselves, their own crafts, as you just said?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a very, very important point and something that I do for myself. I try to do it on regular basis, as in like daily, but every once in a while, one should definitely do that. I think it's very important to take a step back and kind of look at things in perspective that what am I doing? What is the end goal of all of this? Who is going to benefit from this? Why am I putting the work that I'm putting into this? So a bit of this introspection I think has to happen, you know, on regular basis. Like once in a while, one should definitely sit down and think of these things and think of the broader impact of, how their work kind of affects not only people outside but also themselves. Because I think once someone has this, vision of why they're doing what they're doing, it's then easier to motivate yourself on daily basis that, oh, you remember we talked about this is why I'm doing this, that's why I need to get up today and go to my lab and do this thing. So having that vision clear and reminding yourself of that vision every once in a while, I think is important. I would also say that one should also do something slightly different from their regular work. For example, something that's a hobby, something in the nature or something that gives you joy. Because being one dimensional is not a very healthy thing. While doing your work, while being an active researcher, while being an active whatever, you should also take some time to do something that is not exactly aligning with your work, but something that gives you joy, because that is what makes you feel human. That is what makes you feel happy, right? And that is important because that gives you the energy to go back to what you're doing, as your daily work. So doing that as often as one can do is also important. It might be as trivial as listening to music or taking a walk in the nature. So doing those, small bits here and there just to keep your sanity and keeping yourself happy, I think is very important.
There's this final segment that we do on the show. Dr. Sharma, what is your word to humanity?
Hmm. Very profound question. um, I would say that for us as humanity overall, we all should strive towards becoming better versions of ourselves and try to make this as an inward competition rather than outside. That look at yourself as to how far you have come from where you were and kind of appreciate that journey. Uh, and there's nobody else in that journey who's running along with you. There's no race, there's no competition with someone outside. So make this an internal competition and try to be a better version of yourself every single day. That is what I think we as humanity should try to incorporate and learn and imbibe.
Dr. Saransh Sharma, thank you so very much. It was a delight talking to you. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on this podcast. I really feel very grateful and for all the wonderful questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.